Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. In fact, tonight we have an old co-host, Don Dupay, coming back on after a 15-year absence. We're going to run a couple of his old editorials from 15 years ago and have about a 35-minute interview with him that's coming up. So stay tuned for that. But first, as we always do, we'll bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight is from Oklahoma. Oklahomans have rejected adult use legalization. A majority of voters in Oklahoma this Tuesday decided against a citizens-initiated measure, State Question 820, that sought to legalize the adult use marijuana market and provide legal relief to those with cannabis-related convictions. The vote took place in a special election, an unusual circumstance that may have impacted its chances of success. In July, advocates for State Question 820 turned in nearly twice the total number of signatures necessary to qualify the initiative for last November's 2022 vote. However, Oklahoma's Secretary of State's office took an excessive amount of time to ultimately verify proponents' signatures. The opponents of the measure then filed a series of questionable legal challenges, litigating various facets of the campaign, including challenges to the initiative's summary language. Although Oklahoma's Supreme Court ultimately dismissed those challenges, they did so after the time had elapsed for state officials to include the ballot measure on last year's printed ballots. In October, Republican Governor Kevin Stitt issued the executive proclamation calling for this week's special election. The governor had been vocal in his opposition to legalization, stating that it's not right for Oklahoma. Several other prominent members of the Republican Party, including U.S. Senator James Lankford and Oklahoma's Attorney General Getner Drummond, publicly opined against the initiative. Ultimately, voters decided against the measure by a margin of 62% against and 38% in favor. In 2018, Oklahomans voted in favor of allowing medical cannabis access. Oklahoma now has one of the most robust medical marijuana programs in the United States. An estimated 400,000 Oklahoman residents are registered to access cannabis from state licensed dispensaries. Those who engage in marijuana-related activities but who are not registered in the state's medical program face some of the strictest penalties in the nation, with adults convicted of either growing or selling even small amounts of cannabis for non-medical purposes facing up to life in prison under Oklahoma law. You know, we can't win them all, and advocates in Oklahoma were dealt a loss. The vote on State Question 820 took place in a special election, an unusual circumstance that almost certainly impacted its chances of success. Nonetheless, we can't let one loss define who we are as a movement, nor can we let it slow our momentum. In fact, at the same time Oklahomans were heading to the polls, lawmakers in other states were voting to advance adult use legalization efforts. In Hawaii, the Senate voted 22-3 in favor of legislation to legalize cannabis for adults this week. In Delaware, members of the House voted 28-13 in support of legalization legislation. In Minnesota, a pair of bills legalizing and regulating the adult use cannabis market have passed multiple committees and are anticipated to receive a floor vote in the coming weeks. The bills have the support of Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz, who publicly predicted that the state would pass legalization by May. In short, we may have lost one battle, but we're winning the war. Public support for legalization remains at an all-time high and includes a majority of self-identified conservative voters. 21 states have legalized cannabis for adults, and additional states are poised to join them in the coming months. On another issue, after several months' delay, the United States Justice Department has opened the online application process for those persons eligible to receive certificates of pardon indicating that their marijuana-related convictions have been pardoned by President Biden. The website began accepting applications hours after a notice published in the Federal Register stated that the Office of Pardons attorneys had developed the subject form to collect information for potential pardon recipients. In the notice, the office estimated that as many as 20,000 people may apply to receive pardon certificates. In October, President Joe Biden proclaimed that he was using his executive authority to provide pardons to all Americans with federal convictions on their record for low-level marijuana possession. Estimates provided last fall by the U.S. Sentencing Commission indicated that nearly 7,000 Americans would be eligible for relief. I actually am eligible for 2 pardons, one in Washington, D.C. and one in Portland, Oregon. And I've applied for the one in Portland. I'm waiting on data to apply for the one in Washington, D.C. The issuance of the pardon certificates are important because possessing the certificate provides proof that one's conviction has been pardoned under the terms of the President's proclamation. The President's pardon proclamation does not provide relief for state-level marijuana possession convictions. To date, 24 states have enacted laws providing explicit pathways to either expunge or otherwise set aside the records of those with low-level marijuana convictions at the state level. So far, state and local officials have issued over 100,000 pardons and more than 1.7 million marijuana-related expungements since 2018. Our last story tonight is from the United Kingdom, London. The use of cannabis products is associated with symptomatic improvements in pain patients with and without comorbid anxiety, according to data published in the journal Expert Review of Neurotherapeutics. British investigators assessed the safety and efficacy of cannabis-derived products in 1,254 chronic pain patients. Of these, 711 subjects were also diagnosed with anxiety. The study subjects were participating in the United Kingdom's medical cannabis registry, and each of them possessed a doctor's authorization to access cannabis. The study participants consumed cannabis by either vaporizing marijuana flower or by ingesting plant-derived extracts containing both THC and CBD. The researchers assessed subjects' symptoms compared to baseline after 1, 3, and 6 months. Cannabis treatment was associated with, quote, significant improvements in all primary outcomes at all time points, end quote. The authors reported. Those with anxiety reported greater improvements. Both cohorts achieved significant reductions in their opioid consumption over the course of the study, a finding that's consistent with dozens of other trials. The authors concluded, quote, a potential association between initiation of cannabis-based medical products and improvements in pain and health-related quality of life, as well as reductions in opioid consumption and an acceptable adverse events profile in both cohorts was found, complementing previous medical cannabis research studies done by UK's health authority. Moreover, chronic pain patients with comorbid anxiety may achieve better health-related quality of life outcomes and potential pain outcomes due to cannabis medicine's peripheral and central effects, end quote, the authors concluded. Several placebo-controlled trials document the ability of vaporized herbal cannabis to significantly mitigate pain in various patient populations, including those suffering from HIV, diabetes, spinal cord injury, or severe treatment-resistant neuropathy, or nerve pain. This study, comparing the effects of medical cannabis for chronic pain patients with and without comorbid anxiety, a cohort study, appears in this month's edition of Expert Review of Neurotherapeutics. Well, that's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. If you or a loved one are looking for help finding a doctor who can help you get your state's medical marijuana permit, I work with doctors, and we have a referral for doctors all over the United States. So call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. If you have any questions about medical marijuana, feel free to call us. That number, 503-235-4606. Now we're going into our interview with Don Dupay. I pulled 3 old editorials that Don did about 15 or 16 years ago. This first one we're going to run first is actually from May of 2007, when I had received a subpoena for dozens of Oregon medical marijuana patients' medical records. And I refused to turn those over. In fact, we went to court and fought that. And Don's editorial will talk about that. In the end, we ultimately won and quashed that subpoena. So stay tuned. After this old editorial, it's about 4 minutes, then we'll go into my interview done this week with Don. Don's writing a lot of books these days. We'll talk about that. And we have a couple other editorials we'll drop in there after a few minutes. So stay tuned. And remember, help us restore hemp. Good night.
Don, you want to talk about
oh, do I?
some of these things I know you've been wanting to?
Oh, do I? Tyranny is here, right here in Portland, Oregon. Behind my back, and without my knowledge or consent, a federal grand jury wants to review my personal medical records held by the THCF Foundation.
Yep, Don was one of the folks whose records have been subpoenaed.
Paul Stanford has been commanded to appear before the grand jury and bring with him my personal medical records, my history, and by the way, Paul Stanford, you are committed to secrecy. Do not tell Don Dupay. I can't tell you how outraged I am at our Nazi government's attitude. Screw the Constitution, we will do what we want to anyway. I'm boiling mad, and you should be too, because if they can snoop uninvited through my medical records, second-guessing my doctor's evaluations, looking at my medications, they can obtain and snoop through yours too. I remind you that the government is the enforcement arm of Big Pharma. And Big Pharma wants to know what medications you're taking so that they can find out how much that damned marijuana is costing them in lost refills. Snoop, 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 and of course, do it in secret. Paul Stanford elected to go public with his information, possibly to his own detriment, but we both realize that what the government wants to do in secret has to have the heat, light, and glare of publicity put on it. Amen. And that's why I'm talking about it in public tonight, because the DEA brought it to me personally. So I have this to say to the DEA. When the federal government subpoena came down, the DEA began visiting and intimidating the THCF patients. They came to talk to me on Wednesday, May the 2nd. One of them was a bald-headed punk, about 25 years old, with a DEA badge hanging around a string on his neck. The other one was a scruffy, dirty-looking fella, looked like he'd been a few days out of the homeless shelter that I used to manage. We'd like to ask you some questions, Mr. Dupay, they said, about medical marijuana patients you know. And of course, it's off the record. As you can imagine, I was really eager to talk to them after they assured me it was off the record. Yeah, right. That's when I turned on my own tape recorder. They sent 2 kids, that's what they did, that weren't even born when I carried a homicide detective's badge in this city, to talk to me and ask me questions. Obviously, me, of all people they come to ask questions to, they do not know who I am. I was rude to them, calling one a bald-headed punk, because he was, the other one scruffy and dirty, and I strongly suggested that they get a real job and stop messing with medical patients. I made them so angry, they threatened to arrest me if I did not cooperate with their federal investigation. I discussed this encounter with Graham Boyd of the ALCU, and we wondered together what crime I may be committing by failing to cooperate with George Bush's henchmen. After all, not cooperating with tyranny is the very foundation of this country. They soon left with their tail behind their legs, not willing to take any more of my insults. They returned 30 minutes later with a scanner and read all the license plates of the vehicle in my driveway. But they did stay inside their vehicle when they did it, and it was a black Ford Astro van. We're starting to receive federal attention with the DA forbidding us to have Hemp Fest. Sorry, that didn't work. Now we must not allow them to happen to look at our medical records either. This is way too dangerous. We must not allow it to happen. Tyranny is here in Portland, and we damn well better stop it right now. That's the way I feel about it tonight, right down here on Hemp Street. I'm angry, and I want you to know I'm angry.
Mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Right.
Well, I would like to welcome back on the show after more than a decade, maybe almost 2 decades, Don Dupay. Welcome back, Don.
Welcome.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Paul. Glad to be here.
As our really long-term viewers might know, Don is a former Portland police detective, worked his way up from patrolman to homicide detective for a number of years here in Portland. And he's now an author of a number of different books. Is it 6 books you have now?
I've written 6 books, but 3 of them have been published.
Okay. And so, and you've got another one that's about to come out, right?
The third one is about to come out.
So, for years, about 20 years ago, Don came to the studio and I invited him on the show. You want to tell our audience how that started?
We came down to the old studio, and Dr. Levesque was there, and you were there, and we were getting ready, getting signed up for our medical marijuana cards. And
that's when we first did it in the TV studio, before we had an office.
Right, first started.
People just started showing up at the studio to see Dr. Philip Levesque, who would have just celebrated his 100th birthday back on February 22nd. We just recognized that. He did celebrate his 90th birthday on the set of our show, though.
That was in 2002. That's when I got my first medical marijuana card from you and Dr. Levesque.
Uh-huh.
And you were kind enough to show me how to grow pot. And I've been thankful for that for all these years. I wanted to thank you on television for showing me how to grow marijuana.
I'm very happy to do it. I tried to help all patients who wanted any information
Yeah,
with
we
that.
all go-
I recommended Jorge Cervantes'
Yes.
Marijuana Horticulture book, which is a real bestseller out there. That's where I learned to start with, really. I had some other people taught me here in town, mainly John Sajo. He was kind of my guru when I first moved here and started growing indoors. But
Now we're going with a couple of clones.
and we were giving away lots of clones at that point.
Yep.
We would give away 100 clones, 200 clones a month at Oregon Normal meetings initially.
Yes. And then when Ramona, my sweetheart at that time, got her medical card, you gave her some clones, and I remember she brought some home on the bus in a paper bag. It was kind of embarrassing because they were sticking out the top.
Right.
Well,
That was
kind of
pretty
fun.
common.
It was fun. So we got going, got growing.
All right. So before that, though, you started out with the Portland Police Bureau. That was your first job with the police as a patrolman?
Yeah. I joined the Portland Police in 1961. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I was just less than a year and a year old
A long
in
time
61.
ago. And I was a street cop in North Portland, Albina, St. John's for 6 years.
Uh-huh.
After 5 years, you get a stripe on your shirt. You get a hash mark like in the military.
Okay.
I had one stripe on my uniform shirt. And then I got promoted to detective in 1967, and I worked burglary for years and years. I was the person that had silent alarms. I set up the silent alarms, called burglary for silent alarms, infrared. Did that kind of work for a while. Got bored with it after about 8 years. Got myself talking into homicide. That was a good move and a bad move because it's a prestigious job, but your job is looking at dead bodies, and that's not too much fun.
And trying to meet bad guys.
And trying to put bad guys in jail.
Right.
I did put a few in jail over the years.
Good, good. So how long were you a homicide detective altogether?
About a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when the corruption got too much, and I left the police department because of that corruption.
Mm-hmm. So, how do you want to talk about the corruption? Yeah, I know you were telling me that there were police officers running bordellos and drugs on the street. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. When I first started out at North Precinct, the precinct commander, his name was Jim Purcell Jr., and he had been a former chief of police here in Portland. And he was running 2 horse houses on my district. That's the kind of corruption they had, and there was absolutely no law enforcement in St. John's or in North Portland. And that's what people don't realize now. It seems
kind of weird, you have to say, there was no law enforcement in North Portland, but there wasn't. You could drink any place until you fell off the bar stool, no matter how old you were, as long as you could sit up straight. And you could buy heroin at any of the clubs all along the avenue. And I'm talking about 5 or 6 or 7 different establishments where you could buy heroin. So that was just because of the structure that was set up by the boss. You know, it just everything was illegal and nobody cared.
And that was in the 70s?
1960s.
1960s.
1960 to 67.
Okay.
And then after that it got...
That was really a racial divide too, right?
Definitely a racial divide.
Where you were at was mainly the African American quarter that was left after they cut off, put the I-5 interstate through there, right? And that cut the neighborhood in two.
It didn't cut it in two, but it sure chopped up a good section of it. It took out the I-5 freeway, which they called initially the Minnesota freeway, because it took out Minnesota Street.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. I didn't know that. I wasn't around then.
That's the reason they called it the Minnesota freeway. They took out Minnesota Street, so it took out a good section of the Albina, and then the expansion of Emmanuel Hospital took out another big section of it. Left Albina pretty much desolate like it is, or was for a long time before they started rebuilding.
Yeah, now
Albina,
it's
Albina's
upscale.
down there is now it's all coffee shops and
Marijuana
condos,
dispensaries.
Marijuana dispensaries.
A lot of restaurants.
Lots of restaurants, lots of marijuana dispensaries, which is pretty cool of it.
Yeah, we helped establish that.
Yeah, we did.
They don't know it, but some of our viewers know.
You're looking at 2 of the older, hard-working people in the industry. We got it started. Paul got it started, brought me involved. I had made arrests. I got commendations for arresting people for marijuana when I was a policeman. And then after I got enlightened by smoking a joint or 2, I realized, uh-oh, is that all it's about? So
Let's talk about when you first, we often ask our guests about their first marijuana experience. For me, I was just 11 years old in Dallas, Texas. That's another story, though. So for you, though, you were grown, and was it your wife or your girlfriend who introduced you to it?
I was 36 years old, so I was certainly not a newcomer.
And now you're 86.
I'm 86 now.
So it's exactly 50 years ago.
Yeah. My wife at that time was smoking marijuana behind my back.
Mm-hmm.
I was a detective, so she was hiding it from me, of course. But one day I came
What
home,
year was that?
1970-ish,
Okay.
and came home and she was, I had found a couple of marijuana seeds on the couch, and I asked her about them. And she didn't know anything about it, how that marijuana seeds got in my house. But she, under my expert questioning, admitted that she'd been smoking pot, and she offered me a joint, and I decided, well, what the hell. So I'm going to try it. And I smoked that joint, and I realized then that I had been lied to, like everybody else, over the years. And that's when I decided, when I had an opportunity to get with Paul on the show, was to try and make amends and apologize to the people that I arrested for medical marijuana, or for marijuana, period.
Mm-hmm.
Because in those days it was a felony.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
I remember at first you said you had an editorial, and now we have right here, we'll show a better picture of it, this kind of collected book of your editorials. It's
yes.
Don Dupay's View from the Street, featuring the Hemp Street TV editorials and other insights. That's one of your 6 books, one of the 3 that's in print,
yeah,
right?
Yes. I self-published this. I thought that these editorials should be kept someplace.
Well, we have a bunch of them on YouTube, and we'll pull a few out and show our viewers here. In fact, we might as well just do it right now. So we'll be back in just a moment after you see some of the Hemp Street editorials with Don Dupay and I, both a good 20 years younger. Stay tuned.
You have an editorial for us this week, Don?
It's time to talk about the pharmaceutical companies again, Paul. A while back, the Oregonian ran an article prominently about methadone. It said methadone shows its dark side. Well, those of you who are not familiar with methadone, is really is a synthetic heroin, and it's used in the treatment and maintenance of heroin addicts, and more recently, particularly by the state of Oregon, as a pain management drug. I know a lot about methadone because my life partner is a longtime methadone patient. I've written articles about methadone, and I did a 1-hour television show called Methadone, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Like all pharmaceuticals, it is all of those things. This article was written about people dying from methadone overdoses, usually bought on the street. It said that 83 people died from methadone overdose in 2004. Well, it's a pain management drug. It's cheap. It costs 10 cents a pill. The state of Oregon, looking to save money on their health plan, was paying $4 or $4.50 for oxycodone. Now they're going to pay 10 cents rather than $4 for methadone. That makes sense to them. But methadone isn't exactly like oxycodone or heroin exactly either. It works slower and it works different on different people. In order to get relief, you have to take more, it seems. So people do die from drug overdose if they take it and don't know about it off the street. Methadone will make you throw up, it'll stop your heart, it'll knock you out, and that definitely is a bad side effect.
I hate it when my heart stops.
I hate that, yes. It's actually a good term to describe all of those pharmaceuticals because they can have deadly side effects too. Do you remember Vioxx? Do anybody remember about the phthalimide babies? Do you remember about aspirin? Aspirin, well, aspirin kills 7,000 to 10,000 people every year. Is aspirin more dangerous than heroin? I don't know. 94 people died in Oregon from heroin overdose in 2004. And here I'm purely guessing, but 94 is pretty close to 100. So if 100 people died in all 50 states, that means about 5,000 people died from heroin overdose in America. And aspirin kills 7,000 to 10,000 people a year. And we view aspirin as harmless. I'm not picking on aspirin. Of all the ways it dies at the hands of the pharma terrorists, aspirin is probably not a particular problem. And I've told you before about some of the other drugs. Ambien, the widely advertised sleeping pill, it's a copycat, the copycat drug, Lunesta, the little green butterfly that comes and puts you to sleep. Ambien has 180 side effects, from cramps and giving you bad gas to heart attacks. Now, the side effects of Ambien could be death. And I saw a commercial a while back by Merck Pharmaceuticals. The syrupy-voiced actor said, trying to convince me that Merck is truly interested in my health. These are the people that killed all these people with Vioxx. I wrote an editorial about the murderers at Merck. Tylenol is another poison advertised to control pain. It's a liver poison. If aspirin is hard on your stomach, take Tylenol, they say. Of course, they don't mention its dark side. If you're a patient with hepatitis or if you have a bad liver, don't ever take Tylenol. It's liver poison. I've said that thousands of times here. Almost all pharmaceuticals can kill you. They have a dark side, and that's what I wish the article had said. But they were picking on a particular drug that they don't know all that much about. The dark side of any pharmaceutical, though, remind you, starts in the boardroom, where the three-piece suits are looking for the next worldwide bestseller, the next Ambien, the next Viagra, the next Vioxx. As long as they worship the god of gross profit, as long as the greenback dollar is king, there will always be a dark side to pharmaceutical drugs. If they kill a few thousand people with their poison, well, that's cost-benefit analysis. Sometimes it's murder. And that's the way I see it tonight, right down here on Hemp Street.
All right. Thank you.
With more and more people using marijuana as medicine, we just talked about 14,000 or so here in Oregon alone, way over 100,000 in California. The establishment employers worry about employees being high on the job. Can't have these people using equipment and machinery, they say. We'd be in danger from them. So my question for now is, just what is under the influence? I can only draw from my personal experience, but it is considerable, as I've been using marijuana for 30-some years. I think marijuana in and of itself that if it degrades one's abilities at all, it's statistically insignificant. Marijuana, if it has a problem besides the government, is that it is an enhancer. It makes things taste better, feel better, act stronger. Folks that watch this TV show tell us all the time that if they're using prescription painkillers and they add marijuana to the mix, it will allow them to use less of the pharmaceuticals altogether. And of course, that's why the pharmaceutical companies hate us. If you're having sex, quite frankly, marijuana makes it better. If you're using alcohol, marijuana makes it stronger. It increases the intoxicating effect. Right up front, now I'm going to say that marijuana is not a good fit for everyone. Some people get too nervous, too paranoid, or get uncomfortable. If it bothers you, don't use it. That's my disclaimer. It's not for everyone. But purely guessing, I say that those few folks are few and far between. I only run into one person in my smoking career that got too nervous about using marijuana and couldn't smoke it. I use it as a medical necessity, but I'm aware of a study in Britain about folks using marijuana after driving, and they were found to be more careful drivers. I've always thought so because when I was a street cop here in Portland in the 60s, I never arrested anybody for driving under the influence of marijuana, and there were probably 500,000 people smoking marijuana on the West Coast in the 60s. Why didn't I arrest anybody for it? Well, mainly because it was essentially undetectable. I couldn't smell it. 10 years later, when I started smoking it to cut down on my alcohol consumption, because being a policeman is an impossible task, I received an epiphany. I offer this information also from my personal experience. In the last 30 years, I've been examined by various medical professionals, doctors in general practice, a cardiologist, an osteopath, and a psychiatrist for post-traumatic stress disorder. During routine medical exams, I was always asked, Mr. Dupay, do you smoke? I always said no, early on just to see if they could detect it. They never could. I was in the cardiologist's office one time after I had been smoking, and he hooked me up to an EKG machine. He couldn't tell it either on the EKG machine. Well, your eyes will give you away, people say. Oh, really? I've had my eyes examined for glasses several times, as well as by the medical doctor. I never heard one person say, Don, you've been smoking marijuana. I can see it in your eyes. So just what the hell is under the influence anyway? All my prescription pills for blood pressure and probably all your medications at home have warning stickers all over them, yellow and red, that say don't operate machinery, don't drive or mix with alcohol, they cause drowsiness. But you do it every day. In other words, you take your meds and you drive to work, you drive to Fred Meyer's, you go shopping. So just exactly what is under the influence? Well, what it is really is a misnomer. What they really mean is how does it degrade your ability, if at all? So your ability to work, your ability to drive, your ability to perform required tasks. In the case of cannabis by itself, I still think that it is statistically insignificant in judging performance. And to those concerned employers that always worry, I say, don't. Your marijuana users will continue to do the same good job they've always done, and as safely as they have always done it. And now the answer to the burning question I know is in your mind, did I smoke any marijuana before I came down here tonight to do this TV show? Well, I'm going to leave that to you to decide. And if you think I did, I will also leave it for you to decide if it degraded my abilities in any way. And that's the way I see it tonight, right down here on Hemp Street.
Thank you, Don.
So, you found out marijuana was good. You came on our show to make amends. At some point, though, you decided to open a dispensary, right? And
Yes.
or actually, it was a cannabis club. Remember Sophia?
My son and I opened a marijuana club. We called it SOPHIA's, which was an acronym for Support Organization Practicing Health Information and Awareness. And we charged people $20 a year, which was reasonable, very reasonable,
Yeah.
for a fee to join the club. And we gave each person a card with their photograph on it, so they were card-carrying members of our cannabis club. and we ran quite successfully. The thing about us was, if you were a member and you didn't have any money and you needed some weed, you could come to our shop and we would give you a gram a day. So that while that was a poor business model, giving marijuana away, that's what we were there for.
Mm-hmm.
We actually did quite well though.
Because people would buy more than a gram.
People would buy more than a gram, yeah. But if they were down and out, you know, we'd help them out. That's what it was about. It was about helping people.
Mm-hmm.
So at our high point, we had 2,000 card-carrying members, and we started to attract attention from the city,
Mm-hmm.
of course. But while they threatened me a time or two, there was really nothing they could do about it because we were a club.
Mm-hmm.
We were a private club. We were.
Do you think they ever had people come in and try to be members to?
No, they never
infiltrate?
tried. They never tried that.
Okay.
I was too smart for that.
Yeah. Right. Well, you've been an undercover
Yeah.
a number of times in your police career, probably.
And we had great security too, so we never had any trouble. We had a man at the door, we had a camera at the door, we had a camera watching you as you walked in the hallway, we had cameras watching the whole entire transaction
So you were in Southeast Portland.
in Southeast Portland. Kept a shotgun right close by, just so they knew that no hanky-panky was going to be allowed. So
Uh-huh.
never had
Did anybody you ever have to pull that out?
never had-
Cannabis community is pretty good. Nowadays, a lot of dispensaries are getting robbed,
Yes.
you know, but back then, I guess you did. Thank goodness. So was that on Southeast Division?
It was we lived off of 157th and Powell.
Oh, okay, okay.
So that's where we
It's
were.
a ways
Right
out
on
there.
the bus line, it was good.
I see, I see. And so you operated that for how many years?
We did that for about 3 years. And then,
So
like
this
any-
has been
like any business, you know, it wore itself out.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
I was glad because then the laws was not like they are now. And so there was always that pressure of the cops going to show up, you know. But now I don't have to worry about that anymore. Just getting out of the business.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about what you're doing now. You now have a publishing company with your wife.
Yes.
And how long have you been married?
Wonderful 10 years.
10 years, a decade. Cool.
In 20th of this month.
Oh, okay.
10 years.
All right. So it's like a equinox wedding.
It is 10 years, so we've done quite well together. I think it's a good example of what marijuana didn't do to us, didn't wreck us.
Uh-huh.
You know, I've been quite successful since then.
Uh-huh.
We have our
You've been using
policy-
marijuana now for 50 years.
50 years.
And I've been using it for about the same, maybe more. Let's see. Oh, yeah, a little bit more. 51. So we're like the canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah. Well,
That's what Willie Nelson says, too.
no,
You know, that we, and you know, all of our babies, we had 3 children using cannabis by both parents. All of them were 9-pound babies. They definitely weren't low-weight babies.
no,
You
that
know?
was a myth.
Yeah, and it was disproven back in the 70s with a book by an RN named Melanie Dreyer, Ganja in Jamaica, I think it was her book that talked about birth weight, cannabis, ganja using mothers had higher birth weight babies. But
Well, I have a son. He was normal birth weight.
uh-huh. All right.
That
So
was another myth.
So tell us about your current publishing company and what you're doing. Your wife and you are both writing books, and you're publishing a few other authors, right?
Yes, we are. Well, my first book, Behind the Badge at River City, a Portland Police Memoir, is still selling well,
Uh-huh.
and we continue to produce it. It's on it's the second edition now.
Uh-huh.
It's a history of the Portland Police.
What year was that published?
It was published in 1975, so
Okay.
it's been going for 7 years now.
2015.
I mean,
Oh, in 2015.
I said 1975.
Wrong decade. We're wrong millennium. I understand.
2015.
You know you're getting old when you get the
years.
wrong millennium.
And the second book I wrote was a novel, a fiction novel called Frank's Revenge, Albina After Dark. And it's a story about a serial killer who only kills a certain kind of person and only at a certain time of night.
Uh-huh.
Very selective for a very good reason. And of course the cops don't want to find him, so that's what the story's about, is why why the serial killer is running rampant in the district, killing people, and the cops don't want to do anything about it. So it has a twist at the end, I'll tell you, that is exquisite and beautifully written, if I do say so myself.
Okay.
I'm waiting for you to read the book.
You just gave it to me last week, or about a week ago. I haven't read it yet.
And if you figure out the
I got a
ending,
copy.
if you figure out the ending,
What is
you can let me know.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Yeah, there's a copy of it.
This is it in reverse. We got a picture of it though, so you'll see that. I'm gonna read it. And so is that your third book or your
That's
second?
the second one.
Second one. So you're not really counting the editorials as a book.
No.
It's out of print anyway.
Yeah.
So
The
really
third-
you've got 4 though.
The third book now is called The Tainted Rose, Stories from a Portland Detective, and it will be out sometime by my birthday, I think in June,
Okay. When's your birthday?
June 30th.
Okay.
So I'll be 87, and it will be out by then for sure. And it's got 4 different stories in it. First story is about 3 different jewel thieves I have run across in my career. 2 of them I put in prison. The third one got away scot-free with $1 million worth of jewelry. Interesting story, a very good inside job too.
Huh.
And
So like in a jewelry store, was it?
well,
or a
one
person?
was an inside job on some jewels that were in a hotel safe.
Ah, I see. Okay.
And the guy who had the key to the safe was looking the other way when the jewels missed
Ah,
and disappeared.
I see.
And then the second story in that book is about the different sad women I've run across. Prostitutes, the women whose husbands died in the middle of the night, sad situations, young girls that I had to take to the Wayward Home for Girls when I was a street cop. The third story is about my black girlfriend who was murdered in Seattle as a result of a love triangle, and she was found stabbed 27 times in a park in Seattle. And it's a story about our relationship and how it ended. And the fourth story is called How Heroin Came to Albina, and it's a story about back in the day in the early 60s, where the heroin came from, how it was distributed along the avenue, who had it, where you could buy it, the police that were involved in it, the crook police that were involved in it for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
So the heroin came from the Chinese and was funneled into the communities through the Chinese and through the dishonest cops.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that story's about. So I'm looking forward to that book coming out.
And what's the name again?
Tainted Rose.
Tainted Rose.
Stories from a Portland Detective.
And what's the name of your publishing company that you and your wife have set up?
We are called Oregon Greystone Press.
Oregon Greystone Press. We'll put that website in here and at the end of the show and on our video links as well.
We also publish other people's works, and this book right here, you probably have a reverse image.
Yeah, it's reversed, but we'll show the other way.
It's called Beyond Where the Buses Run Stories. And there's stories in here from 4 or 5 different authors, including Teresa.
Your wife.
My wife, Teresa. And Robert Crane, who's the son of Robert Crane, the TV actor for Hogan's Heroes.
Oh, yeah.
And
He had quite a controversy around his life there.
He sure did.
Yeah.
And so one of the stories that he wrote is in this book, and it's an anthology of 4 or 5 different stories, so it's very good. And it's selling well too.
All right. All right.
So
mainly, if somebody wants these books, you'd send them to Amazon.
well, if you Barnes and Noble,
Or Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble locally, and Amazon for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're over here in the Barnes and Noble in the mall, and there's another one out. Oh, they closed the one at Lloyd Center, didn't they?
There's one in the Clackamas Town Center.
Oh, there's one there too.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're putting out. Do you have plans for any other further books after this?
Oh, we're going to take a break after this one.
It sounds like a lot of work. I
Yeah.
mean, some people say one book.
It takes a lot of time, a lot of money to
Yeah.
self-publish and put out a quality product. So we are tapped out for a while. We're going to take about a year off. I'm going to continue to write my essays because I can't help it myself.
Uh-huh.
I've got
And you publish those online?
I'll publish those online on Medium.com.
Medium.com, which a lot of different authors use.
Yeah.
Medium.com. They like it a lot.
And I
That's
know
what
you've read several of them already.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you haven't.
Well, I've read some of these, but I haven't gone to Medium.com and looked it up. But we'll put that website in here as well. To be honest, I've not read them. But you can. You can beat me to it. Or maybe I will by the time this comes out. So, were you originally from Portland?
Well, no, but I've been here a long time. I've been here since 1948.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Where were you from before that?
I was born in Wenatchee, Washington.
Oh, okay.
My folks ran a restaurant during the war,
Uh-huh.
and were very, very successful. So successful, they ran another restaurant. They ran two of them, one in Yakima, Washington, and one in Wenatchee, Washington.
Uh-huh.
And after the war was over, they sold out and ran a small cafe in Bozeman, Montana for a while.
I see.
Because my mother went back to Montana. They were both, my parents were from Montana.
They're from Montana. Okay.
So I went back to Montana and then came to Oregon to buy a large commercial pie bakery called Crispy Pie Company, which was on the entire block of which is now 9th and East Burnside, where the Jupiter Hotel is now.
Oh, okay.
They owned that whole block. And from there, they sold that for a lot more money. And
K-Boo's on that block too, the radio station.
yeah,
They're in the
now.
basement of that
Yeah.
building.
And then they sold out and bought a restaurant, another restaurant, running Dupay's Drive-In Cafe, which was in McLaughlin and Holgate for 10 years at least, many years. All the time I was in high school, wasn't in the military.
I see. So you moved here with their business.
Moved here in 1948, came here in 1947 Studebaker.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That was a pretty good car in its
That
day.
was a good car.
Yeah.
So I've been here a long time.
Yeah, 48 to 2023, that is a long time.
It's a long time.
So, 75 years. So you were just a little boy when you moved here.
I was a little boy.
Yeah. So how is it that you came to become a police officer from growing up here? You went to high school. Did you go do any time in college, or did they have community colleges in the early,
They didn't
late
have
50s?
community college, and I went to Lewis and Clark for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
After I got out of high school, back in those days, Paul, back in the old days, they had draft,
Uh-huh.
and
Right.
I was an 8-year obligor in the military.
Right. And you're a 100% disabled veteran today.
100% disabled now.
I have 30% disability from my teenage service in the U.S. Army. You were in the Army?
No,
Didn't-
please.
I don't know.
I was in the Navy.
Okay. Okay.
When I
My father was in the Navy.
when
My
I
grandfather was in the Army.
I was trying to beat the draft.
I
So I
see.
joined the Navy Reserve.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of Vietnamese out at sea.
No,
It's a pretty safe bet.
it was a safe bet. So I joined the Navy Reserve and spent 3 years on active duty in the Navy,
What years were those?
1956 to 1959.
So that was really before
It's a Cold
Vietnam.
War.
Yeah.
Yeah, my service was all done by the time Vietnam came along.
Yeah.
It was a
Korea was over.
Cold War. Yeah.
Where were you stationed?
I was stationed in Germany,
Okay.
Toten, North Germany, which is right on the Baltic Sea.
Uh-huh.
As much as I tried to avoid the Army by joining the Navy,
Uh-huh.
I spent
That's
2
a
years,
cold port, isn't it?
I was spent 2 years on an army base.
Oh, okay.
They hid 17 sailors right in the middle of this huge army base because we were doing secret specialized work.
Uh-huh.
So they hid 17 sailors right in the middle of this big army base. So I was stuck on the army base.
Uh-huh. And you did coding, right? You were in Signal Corps or something like that.
I was an intercept operator.
Yeah. So you intercepted foreign language things, or
We intercepted a lot of things.
I see.
If they were sending it, we were listening to it.
Right.
In fact, if you send a Western Union telegram to your mother telling her, wishing her birthday, happy birthday, some military person will read that before your mother ever gets it.
Uh-huh.
And how do I know?
Because you were the guy
used
that
to
had
be
to
my
read it.
job, yeah.
Did you ever run across anything that set off alarm bells, or?
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
We intercepted a lot of teletype traffic, and anything that was interesting went in one box, and stuff that was not interesting, like birthday cards, went in the trash bin.
Mm-hmm. What, the birthday cards wouldn't get through?
Birthday cards
They'd
went
go
in
out.
the trash bin. Yeah.
Okay. So, when you first let's go jump ahead past you somehow got in the police force, and your wife introduced you to marijuana. Did you continue using marijuana
Absolutely.
while you were a police officer?
Yeah.
How did you approach marijuana use with the public? How long from the time you started smoking marijuana till you left the homicide? I guess if you're enforcing homicide laws, marijuana is not something you would interact with.
No, I kept it secret.
You needed to use it to not dream about those bodies, and
I kept it
that,
secret.
right? Because seeing these things, it would be a full sensory thing. You're there, you're going to see them,
Yeah.
you're going to smell them. I can imagine that there were some pretty awful smells at times.
Yeah. I have a whole list of stuff I don't want to remember, don't want to smell, don't want to think about.
I'm sorry for bringing it up.
Yeah, well, don't.
Yeah. And if you want to know more, you can look at, what is it, Life Behind the Badge?
I am behind the badge in River City, and there's an essay on Medium. It's called PTSD.
Uh-huh.
And it's about my PTSD from the police department. Stuff I don't want to remember.
Uh-huh. What I find when I quit smoking cannabis is after a few days, usually it's 2 or 3 days, then I start remembering my dreams very vividly. And it's like when you quit, but when I go back to using cannabis again, I don't remember my dreams.
Yeah.
So that has something to do
It
with
definitely-
your ability to treat post-traumatic stress patients.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. So when you started using marijuana, and how long were you a police officer during that period? Like a decade or so?
Well, yeah, at least 5 years.
Uh-huh.
I kept it hidden.
Right. Did any other police officers smoke pot, or did
Oh,
you
yeah,
not?
hell yes.
Did you interact with them at all?
No.
No, you all were just in the closet.
Everybody kept it a secret, but there's a lot of people that smoked pot back in those days.
Uh-huh.
And when cocaine started to come along too.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something else completely different, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this show is called Cannabis Common Sense, so
Yeah.
we try to focus on that, as the banner behind us says here, or montage here. So you're going to take a rest now that you're done with your fourth.
Yeah.
It's your third or fourth book, depending on whether you count that first compilation of your editorials. No other writing projects for now.
I'll continue to write editorials and short stories. I've kind of become enamored of short story fiction
Uh-huh.
lately, and so I never wrote fiction before, except for that book. But that's
Right. So you've got 3 books that are nonfiction, really.
right.
They're kind of essays, but There's just this one fiction book.
One fiction, and the rest of them are memoir.
Uh-huh.
But I continue to write these essays and short stories. I've written a trilogy called the 1111 trilogy. It's about an electric clock that flashes 1111. And you see it at night at 11:11.
I can see it now.
You can see it at 11:11 in the morning,
Uh-huh.
and you realize the clock is trying to tell you something.
Uh-huh.
And so there's one story about the clock. The second in the trilogy is about a Ferris wheel, an old forgotten Ferris wheel, and how it's found, and what 1111 has to do with that story. And the third story is about a clock that stands on the street, big old clock, round-faced clock, whose vandal breaks the glass and gets the hand stuck in 1111. And so there's a story about how the old clockmaker fixes that and how that affected his life. So there's 3 stories about 1111
And these are on medium.com.
on medium.com.
So is it medium.com/Don Dupay or?
Don Dupay, yeah.
So that's DON-DUPAY.
And then you click on my little picture up there on the right-hand corner.
Is there any space between Don and Dupay, or is it all
No.
just together?
One word.
One word, okay. So our
And,
viewers can find that pretty easily.
I just wrote a story called Waiting for the Dough. It's a play on words. Waiting for the dough. Waiting for the dough. It's a short story about a guy who's waiting for the bank to open so he can cash his paycheck.
Okay, the dough, not Godot, like
Waiting for
the
the
Beckett.
dough.
Wasn't it
The
Beckett
dough.
who wrote that, I think. Anyway. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say in closing, Don?
I just want everybody to know that us 2 guys sitting here have been smoking pot for 50 years and it hasn't harmed us.
No.
It hasn't stopped our production, hasn't been lazy, it hasn't damaged me in any way that I know of, and I can.
And it has a lot of benefits.
It is.
Just the other, cannabis for me is a catalyst for more activity. It's and it not just for me. It goes back to prehistoric times. You can hear Louis Armstrong say the same thing 100 years ago, or Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, was an advocate of cannabis use. So, we're coming back, and hopefully we'll see hemp products go back to their rightful place. You can publish your book on hemp paper.
Yes.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've been here with Don Dupay, who is a former Portland police officer and homicide detective, longtime co-host of this very show back about 20 years or so ago. And want to thank you for coming back on after all these years, Don.
It's been great.
Congratulations on having, all these books out there, and I
They're
appreciate
great.
you coming in to talk to us about it.
Anytime.
So,
Call me back.
all right, we will. And keep working to restore hemp.
Absolutely.
Good night.